From busted Batmobiles to giant lightning machines, the wilderness is full of incredible inventions that have been left to rust in peace. So today we're going to head into the wild and find them as we check out the most unusual abandoned technology and vehicles in the world. Submarine Subway. If you go scuba diving off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, you'll find what looks like the remains of an underwater civilization with a great public transport network. See, around 30 miles offshore, the seabed is home to 50 decaying subway cars from New York that are covered in seaweed and swarming with fish. It looks like the lost city metro of Atlantis. But the carriages were deliberately sunk 100 feet underwater in 2002 when the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources decided to create an artificial coral reef on the ocean floor. The area's flat seabed has barely any rocks or natural corals, so there isn't much food for fish to eat due to a lack of rock-dwelling crustaceans and mollusks, and the fish also have nowhere to hide from their predators. So the so-called Comanche Reef was created to become a new home for wildlife and attract more fish to the area. They removed each carriage's windows and doors, and when the cars were sunk, they were soon colonized by mussels, shrimp, and hungry fish to eat them. Artificial reefs like this can contain around 400 times more food for fish than a flat seabed, and today, the abandoned subway cars are absolutely teeming with life. Meh. That's still half as busy as the subway I have to take every morning. French fly. On the outskirts of Chevy, France, there's a rusty, unassuming hangar that became home to an old hovercraft from the 1970s. This hunk of metal is the Aerotrain I-80, a futuristic vehicle that was developed by the French engineer Jean Bertin. Bertin built several prototypes with different aesthetics, but they all functioned like giant hovercrafts that floated on an air cushion a couple of inches above a specially built monorail track that ran through the train's body. As the train moved, it pumped air against the top and sides of the rail, which caused enough downforce to lift it up and enough sideways pressure to secure itself to the track. Regular trains are slowed down by the friction between the wheels and the rails, and commonly used models often top out at around 100 miles per hour. But the floating Aerotrain didn't have to worry about this friction, so it could fly above its track at 267 miles per hour. The I-80 was the final prototype, and it was ready in 1974, but Bertin had competition from another high-speed train system called TGV that was being developed by France's National Railway Company, SNCF. TGV trains ran on specialized high-speed tracks that could carry them at around 200 miles per hour, but they didn't float, so they could also use existing slower tracks where building new ones would be too expensive. This made it far more cost-effective than the Aerotrain, and in 1974 the French government cancelled Bertin's project and funded TGV instead. TGV is still used today, while most of the Aerotrains have been left to rust in warehouses where they've been targeted by vandals and arsonists. However, this prototype 02 Aerotrain was rescued and displayed in a small museum in Versailles, and some of the monorails are still visible in the French countryside. So remnants of the abandoned project live on, and who knows, maybe someday the Aerotrain will fly again. Unlimited power. Some abandoned inventions are so mysterious that it's impossible to tell what they are, like this gigantic contraption left in a forest near Moscow, Russia. It looks like a spaceship that crash-landed on Earth or the weirdest water slide in the world. But in reality, the device is a Marx generator that sits inside the High Voltage Research Center, a science facility that was abandoned after the fall of the Soviet Union. This machine is designed to charge itself up with massive amounts of electricity before using it to produce bolts of artificial lightning. Soviet scientists built it in the 1970s to test how well power lines and aircraft would stand up to lightning strikes. But the generator was extremely expensive to operate, so when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the newly formed Russian government couldn't afford to keep the facility running. This meant that the research center was abandoned and left to gather dust. But its Marx generator is still the largest in the world, and in 2014 the Russian government briefly turned it back on for a demonstration to prove that it still works. Man, I guess lightning can strike the same place more than once. The American Dream. I hate to break it to you, but size does matter. And this next vehicle is as big as abandoned cars get. See, the American Dream is the longest stretch limo in the world, with a 100-foot long body that holds a hot tub, a helipad, and a hinge in the middle to go around corners. It was built in 1986 by J. Orberg, a car designer who famously developed the DeLorean from Back to the Future. He hoped Hollywood studios would rent the limo and use it in their movies, but it was incredibly expensive to maintain and a nightmare to park, so nobody wanted to hire it. In the late 90s, Jay gave up on his dream and abandoned the limo outside a warehouse in New Jersey. He thought the abandoned vehicle would sit there and rot away forever, but he did put it on eBay in case anyone else wanted it. Around 20 years later, in 2014, a man called Mike Manning bought it for an undisclosed sum to restore it, but he discovered that he couldn't afford the extensive work the car needed. So in 2019, he sold it to Michael Deezer, the owner of a huge vehicle collection that's kept at the Orlando Auto Museum in Florida. Deezer had the funds to fix the limo, and 3 years and $250,000 later, the dream was alive again. The car has been fully restored to full working condition, and today you can see the world's longest limo for yourself at the Orlando Auto Museum. Rusty Railroad. Out in the Salar de Uyuni salt flat in Bolivia lies a cemetery with over 100 bodies decaying under the sun. But it isn't a graveyard for people. The Train Cemetery is an area of the salt desert near the city of Uyuni that contains over 100 abandoned train cars that have sat there since the 1940s. Uyuni was founded in 1890, and several railways were built to connect it with Bolivia's other major cities. This allowed Uyuni to become a railway junction that linked the cities together, and it soon became an important transport hub in Bolivia's mining industry, as trains carrying tin often passed through it on the way to their final destination. Uyuni wanted to establish an even bigger rail network in the early 20th century, so they imported lots of new trains from Britain. However, the mining industry went downhill in the second half of the 1940s, so the trains were no longer needed, and the demoralized citizens of Uyuni dumped them in the desert, where they've rusted ever since. Normally, the lack of humidity and dry desert air would stop metal from rusting so badly, but the Salar de Uyuni is actually the world's largest salt flat, which means it's the remnants of a saltwater lake that evaporated 40,000 years ago. All the salt was left behind, so whenever the wind blows, it covers the train cemetery, which eats away at the metal and speeds up the rusting process. Man, somebody needs to put those poor locomotive corpses in coffins. Over and out. Puerto Rico is a beautiful island paradise, but if you venture out into the tropical forests around the city of Arecibo, you'll find one giant blemish lying amongst the trees. This concrete dish isn't King Kong's dinner plate, and it's actually all that remains of an incredibly high-tech space telescope at the abandoned Arecibo Observatory. The U.S. National Science Foundation built the observatory in 1963, and they used it to examine asteroids, stars, and planets for over 50 years. It was the largest telescope of its kind on Earth. But in 2017, it was damaged by the Category 5 Hurricane Maria. The NSF made repairs and continued to work at the observatory, but the hurricane had weakened it, and in August 2020, a cable holding up the telescope's central platform unexpectedly snapped and knocked a hole in the dish. The NSF then spent months trying to repair it, but on December 1st, disaster struck when the remaining cables broke and sent the entire platform crashing to the ground. The damage was so catastrophic that the foundation couldn't repair the observatory, meaning the telescope had transmitted for the last time. They've considered building an educational center on the site, but for now, the rubble of this record-breaking observatory is still just lying there, and I think it's pretty ambitious of Google Maps to list the site as temporarily closed. Sorry Google, but I don't think we can buff this out. Ghost ships. When you travel on a cruise ship, you expect to receive a relaxing tour around some of the world's most beautiful locations. However, in April 2000, the passengers aboard the MS World Discoverer were treated to a pretty stressful experience that ended with them fleeing a shipwreck. See, as the Discoverer attempted to sail through the Sandfly Passage in the Solomon Islands, it hit an uncharted coral reef which caused the ship to slowly topple over. The captain sent out a distress signal and a nearby ferry evacuated the passengers. But he knew the ship was going down, so he intentionally beached it in Roderick Bay to make the salvage operation easier. Unfortunately, salvage companies were unable to get there because the Solomon Islands was embroiled in a civil war. So the ship lay abandoned until 2004 when its owner Society Expeditions went bankrupt. Since then, nobody has technically owned the abandoned ship, so it hasn't been recovered. But incredibly, the shipwreck has become a tourist attraction and holiday bungalows have been built right next door, allowing you to stay a stone's throw from the Discoverer. As picturesque as this wreck is, some people are concerned that as the ship continues to degrade, its engine will start to leak oil into Roderick Bay. Back in 2015, a cruise ship called the Ocean Dream was docked in Lime Chabang, Thailand, when it sprung a leak and tilted onto its side. The Shanghai East Time Ship Management Company didn't want to pay to salvage their boat, so they abandoned it. But a year later, the vessel started leaking oil and created a slick that was thousands of feet long, forcing the owners to clean up their mess to prevent a full-blown environmental disaster. So although the Discoverer hasn't started leaking oil yet, maybe the ship will meet a similar fate and the waters in Roderick Bay may not stay crystal clear for much longer. Cartastrophe. If you own an expensive boat or car, the absolute worst case scenario is getting into an accident that causes it to go up in flames. But in February 2022, the Japanese shipping company MOL suffered an even bigger loss when a single accident destroyed over 4,000 vehicles in one fell swoop. See, their cargo ship Felicity Ace was transporting around 4,000 cars from Germany to the US, but as it passed the Azores archipelago, the ship caught fire, and the flames rapidly spread through its hull. Some experts believe it was started by a faulty lithium battery in an electric car, and after the crew were evacuated, the boat burned uncontrollably for around a week before the fire was finally extinguished. A salvage company then spent another week figuring out how to safely move a boat of its size, but they needn't have bothered because on March 1st, the heavily damaged ship unexpectedly capsized and sank to the ocean floor, taking its precious cargo with it. The cars on board included 20 Lamborghini Huracans, 190 Bentleys, and 1,117 Porsches, and in total the vehicles were worth $438 million. Furthermore, the cargo ship itself was worth $24.5 million, so the incident was a pretty big loss for MOL. But on the bright side, the company is worth $12.2 billion, so they'll definitely recover. And the Felicity Ace's abandoned cargo is still resting on the ocean floor. So all the fish in the area received a shipment of some brand new cars to drive around in. Well, as soon as they figure out how to work the pedals, that is. Old folks' home. When rich people grow old and retire, they generally move to Florida. But when a multi-million-dollar military aircraft reaches the end of its life, it joins an exclusive retirement community in Tucson, Arizona. Established in 1946, the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, or Boneyard, houses over 4,000 abandoned airplanes worth a combined $34 billion. Its residents include hundreds of fighter jets like the 1964 F-111 Aardvark and the 1958 F-4 Phantom II. But some of its VIP guests aren't left out in the open, like the world's first stealth fighter, the F-117 Nighthawk. This plane was debuted in 1981, but some of its stealth technology is still top secret. So when it was retired from service in 2008, several models were locked away in Davis-Monthan's warehouses far from the public eye. Some of the Boneyard's planes have been abandoned for decades, but it barely rains in Arizona, and the low humidity prevents the vehicles from rusting. This lets the Air Force take parts from the perfectly preserved planes to reuse them, and on one occasion, they brought a long-abandoned aircraft back into service. Wiseguy is a B-52 Stratofortress bomber that was built in 1955 and flew in the Vietnam War. It was retired to the Boneyard in 2008, but incredibly, the old man was called back into service in 2019 to replace another B-52 that was accidentally destroyed during a training exercise. Wiseguy was in great shape due to the conditions at Davis-Monthan, and although the plane hasn't been used in battle, it's currently on standby, ready to join the fight over 70 years after it was built. To think all my grandpa did after retirement was play golf. The Woodpecker. If you want to find some sweet abandoned technology, it makes sense to head to one of the most famously abandoned places on Earth. Chernobyl's nuclear power plant exploded in April 1986, releasing huge amounts of radiation and creating a 1,000 square mile exclusion zone around the plant that's been abandoned ever since. The area still contains pockets of deadly radiation, and it's illegal to go there without a guide. But brave explorers regularly sneak in to visit an unbelievable piece of abandoned technology called Duga. This huge metal wall is a gigantic radar station that was built by the Soviet Union in 1972. It stands 492 feet high and 2,300 feet long, which is taller than the Great Pyramid in Egypt and almost as long as Dubai's Burj Khalifa. It was built while the USSR was involved in the Cold War against the USA as an early warning system against incoming missiles. The radar could detect missiles up to 1,600 miles away, so it required a huge amount of energy to run, and conspiracy theorists have speculated that one of the main reasons the Chernobyl plant was built in 1977 was to provide it with more power. Other conspiracy theories surround the station, and when Duga was activated in 1976, it was so powerful that radio operators worldwide could hear the repetitive pulsing noise its signals made. So people in the West called it the Russian Woodpecker and theorized it was an experimental Soviet mind control device. Unfortunately, the missile-detecting radar was abandoned when the Chernobyl plant exploded, and it's fallen into decay in the years since. So even if the station really was a secret mind control machine, it doesn't work anymore. Victory to the glorious Soviet Union, comrades! Sorry, I don't know what came over me. Leaving on a jet train. Before the Soviet Union fell in 1991, they developed lots of experimental projects that were too complicated, expensive, or downright insane to work. So the woods, hangars, and scrapyards in modern-day Russia are full of incredible, half-finished inventions like the High-Speed Laboratory Railcar, or SVL. See, in 1966, the USA began testing an experimental jet-powered train called the M497 Black Beetle that could reach speeds of 183 miles per hour. The Soviets wanted to keep pace, so in 1970 they took a carriage from a regular ER-22 train and bolted two Yak-40 jet engines to the roof. The result was the SVL, and the Franken train successfully achieved speeds of 124 miles per hour. The fact the SVL didn't immediately explode was impressive, but there were some serious problems with its design. Firstly, jet engines are deafeningly loud, so it couldn't be used in residential areas. Furthermore, jet fuel is very expensive, so it would be impossible to create a rail network with multiple SVLs due to the fuel costs alone. As a result, the Soviet government canceled the project in 1975, and the only prototype was consigned to a scrapyard in St. Petersburg. The vehicle rusted away for decades while the Soviet Union collapsed all around it. However, the SVL didn't die for good because in 2008 it was rescued and turned into a monument that currently sits outside the Tver Carriage Works train factory. The SVL got a fresh lick of paint and a plaque commemorating its story, which is a pretty nice ending for a pretty awesome vehicle. And hopefully it'll inspire someone else to make a jet train. My commute takes forever. Grand Theft Auto. For most of us, the thought of owning a sports car like a Lamborghini or Bugatti feels like a total pipe dream. But according to the internet, the ultra-rich frequently abandon their luxury vehicles in the wilderness, allowing anybody to come and take them for free. Back in 2011, an image was posted of a Lamborghini Diablo rusting away in a goat field in an undisclosed location. The Diablo was produced from 1990 to 2001, and these vintage cars are now worth up to $300,000, so this was an amazing find. However, according to car enthusiasts on Reddit, the vehicle's opaque blue window suggests it's actually a kit car, which is a cheaper car that's stripped down to its chassis and covered with a fiberglass shell to make it look like a sports car. You occasionally have to cut the windows out of a kit car shell yourself, but the owner of this one didn't bother, proving that the Diablo is likely a fake. But this Lamborghini isn't the only supercar discovery that's turned out to be a hoax. In 2022, images started to circulate online that showed a $2.69 million Bugatti Chiron that had been abandoned in the woods. However, it turned out to be a 3D render by a designer called Fabian Oberhammer, who was imagining what supercars would look like in the post-apocalypse. So despite what the internet says, the world isn't really full of supercars lying in fields, woods, and ditches ready for you to take. In fact, if you really want to find an abandoned luxury car, you'll probably have to head to Dubai. See, lots of foreign expats move to Dubai and take out loans to buy expensive vehicles. But in the UAE, you can go to jail for defaulting on a loan, so if a driver runs into financial trouble and can't afford to pay off their car, they'll often avoid arrest by abandoning the vehicle and fleeing the country. More than 2,000 cars are abandoned in the city every year, and they include luxury vehicles like this $1 million Ferrari Enzo that ended up rotting in a police impound for years. But the UAE isn't the only Middle Eastern country with abandoned vehicles. This Ferrari F40 once belonged to Uday Hussein, the son of Iraq's deceased former dictator Saddam Hussein. Uday met a violent end at the hands of U.S. troops during the Iraq War in 2003, and the car's been abandoned there since. But I wouldn't recommend trying to steal it because in 2020, Uday's sister put out a message on Twitter saying there would be consequences if anyone tried to take it. Messing with Saddam Hussein's family seems pretty foolish, and the Dubai PD's impound lot looks well guarded. So instead of stealing those abandoned Ferraris, let's try something a bit more achievable. I doubt anyone would mind if you stole this old Ford Falcon in Muckleford, South Australia, but good luck getting it down from that tree. The landowner, Eddie Ford, put it up there with a crane in 1985 as a publicity stunt to help promote a book he wrote, and it's been abandoned there ever since. But the Ford isn't the only vehicle that's been found in a tree. At first glance, the trunk in the trunk of this VW Beetle looks like a crude Photoshop. But some online sleuths have found that this model is from the late 1960s, and in good conditions, it's possible for a tree to grow this large over the course of 60 years. So this tree really could have grown straight through the back of the junked VW, giving it a unique wooden interior and making it totally undrivable. Man, none of these abandoned cars are worth stealing. Guess I'll have to buy one instead. Car Forest. Finding a broken down car in the middle of the desert doesn't sound particularly unusual, but if you head to Goldfield, Nevada and venture into the Great Basin Desert, you'll come across a whole fleet of cars that have been abandoned in a very strange formation. At first glance, this looks like the aftermath of the most epic car chase in history, or an automotive rainstorm, but this scene is actually an art installation by Chad Sorg and Mark Rippey called the International Car Forest of the Last Church. The display was built back in 2011, and it's made up of over 40 junkyard cars that have been meticulously stacked on top of each other and buried nose first in the ground. The piece set an incredibly specific world record for the most upturned cars in an art piece, and the artists hoped that the forest would act as a blank canvas for visiting graffiti artists. Today, it's fair to say they achieved their goals, as the forest has become a popular tourist attraction and each abandoned vehicle is covered in completely unique artwork from artists around the world. Who knew abandoned vehicles could make dreams come true? Movie mobiles. In the comics and movies, the Batmobile is a souped-up tank that the Caped Crusader uses to chase criminals. But it looks like Bruce Wayne has fallen on hard times because he's had to abandon his treasured car. Instead of leaving it in a ditch outside Gotham, it's been discarded in a parking lot in Dubai's Al Quoz district, where it's sat since 2015. But Batman isn't real, and this vehicle is really a drivable prop that was used during the production of The Dark Knight that was then shipped to Dubai to promote the movie's release in 2008. Afterwards, the car was obtained by a private owner who put it up for sale for $1 million in 2015. But surprisingly, nobody bought it, and the vehicle has sat gathering dust in a parking lot ever since. So if you get mugged by a criminal in Dubai, the bat signal won't help you. But if you want to figure out who's robbed you, I know some people who specialize in solving mysteries. Never mind. It looks like Scoob and the gang are done solving crime as they've abandoned the mystery machine beside a warehouse in Blaine, Washington. The van was discovered rusting away in 2018, and at first nobody was sure where it came from. But some sleuths on Reddit figured out that this mystery machine wasn't used in a Scooby-Doo movie, and it's actually from the 2001 movie Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. The movie features an R-rated parody of the meddling kids who drive around in this rusty old van, and sometime after the film wrapped, the vehicle was abandoned in Blaine. See, storing cars can be expensive, so Hollywood studios will often just abandon the vehicles they use in a movie once they're finished filming. That's why the iconic van was left in Washington, and in Coober Pedy, Australia, you can find a straight-up spaceship rusting away in an ordinary parking lot. The vehicle is a remnant from the Vin Diesel movie Pitch Black that was filmed in the area in 2000. In the movie, the spaceship crashes onto an alien planet before being abandoned by Vin's character. And in this case, art imitates reality because when the movie wrapped filming, the prop was left in Australia, and now that ship is a permanent fixture on Earth. Well, those vehicles are pretty rusty, so I'm going to wrap this up and go get a tetanus shot. Which of these pieces of abandoned technology and vehicles would you most like to see back in action? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.